A very warm welcome to the first day of our conference, Disrupted Futures, International Lessons on How Schools Can Best Equip Students for Their Working Lives. Such an important topic in the times in which we live, in which it is harder and harder for young people to get a good picture of how life can look, how work can look. And it's fantastic to see so much interest in the topic. The turnout at this conference just shows how important this agenda is for many of us, particularly those who work at the front line in schools. Young and particularly now, young people are perhaps the group least affected by the coronavirus, but there's probably no group that has been more affected by the public policy or responses to contain that virus. If you think about closures of education institutions, if you think the difficulties people in apprenticeship and vocational programs faced during this period, and even now when things are back on track, when our labor markets slowly recover, it's the youngest who have the hardest time. They cannot draw on the experience, on the social capital that older people have at their disposal to navigate the world. Young people are often on their own, and without good information to navigate the world of work, it is very, very hard to get a foothold. So that's really what this is about, and we hope that this conference will be just the first step in an ongoing conversation. What we want to do is share our own research, some emerging research, but also really shine a spotlight on some of the most interesting policies and practices from around the world in helping young people find their way around building guidance on careers. So over the next 3 days, we're going to have 33 papers from scholars, but also practitioners from 14 countries. We selected those papers through an advisory committee, and I really want to thank the members of the committee for their support. That's always a big chunk of work, digesting all of that material and selecting it, curating it. And I'm very grateful for the members of this committee. The program includes many papers that use quantitative evidence to explore the effectiveness of career guidance interventions. That's really what our work at the OECD is about, using lots of numbers. And as you would see from the presentation, this has been also a very important focus of our work at the OECD. Now, with young people staying longer in education than ever before, now leaving education more ambitious as well, but also facing just a very turbulent kind of labor markets. Now, data from PISA, the Program for International Student Assessment, show how distorted and often how myopic the view of young people of their future is. And what is very clear, in the world in which we live, you cannot be and become what you cannot see. Now, it's very important to build on good evidence. At the OECD, we have undertaken a quite novel analysis of national longitudinal data sets, which follow children through adolescence into adulthood. And the idea was to explore what really works in career guidance. Now, what are the predictors in those longitudinal data sets that actually tell us where effective transitions are being made? And on the basis of those insights, and we then selected practice papers, which you're going to see throughout this conference. So before we begin, let me remind you that this conference is recorded, and I also encourage you, as some of you are already doing, use the chat function for your comments, for your questions to the presenters. We will build on them as we are in the discussions. And during this session, we will first hear from Catalina, Covacevich, and Anthony Mann, who have led the analytic work at the OECD. We will then turn to an expert panel to respond to those ideas in the papers, explore the implications. And I'm really delighted that today we are joined by David Bluestein, Hanke Boldemann, Gerd van Brussels, Serena Hopkins, and Deirdre Hughes. And then afterwards, we're going to look for your comments and your questions and discuss it. And finally, we're going to have Nick Chambers sharing with us a really amazing and effective delivery model for engaging employers with schools to deliver career guidance at scale. And a last word of acknowledgement to the JP Morgan Foundation, which has made this conference possible, but more important than that, also has been very supportive to all the work that led to this, all our work on career guidance at the OECD. So with that, let's turn to the first part of the session. Let me invite Catalina and Anthony to take the floor, please.
Thank you so much, Andreas. Let me share my screen and we will make a start. Thank you all so much for joining us today. Over the next half hour, Catalina and I will look briefly at the Youth Employment Challenge across the OECD. We'll briefly on the methodology behind the Career Readiness Project. In this project, we did something really quite unusual. We'll share the results from you, what we found in terms of predictors and indicators of better career outcomes for young people. And we'll spend some time talking about the implications for schools, particularly in the light of what PISA 2018 tells us about the extent to which young people are probably meeting those predictors or indicators. Now, firstly, in terms of the situation we're in, I think it's useful for us to turn our minds back 10 years to the great financial crisis. And as in any sort of like recession or period of economic turbulence, we always find that young people are particularly badly affected. And you see here the youth unemployment percentages between 2007 and 2013. And we see in very many countries, there's a big spike in youth unemployment. And across the kind of the OECD, we find that, even so like 5 years after the crisis, it was about 31% higher levels of youth unemployment. And if we look at, the comparative levels of unemployment between young people and adults, we see that across OECD countries, there's a very consistent picture that young people are at a disadvantage. And so we see that young people are between 1.5 times more likely to be unemployed than people over the age of 25, up to 4 times more likely to be unemployed over the age of 25. And, that we need to realize there's different reasons for this, why young people might be experiencing higher levels of unemployment. But one of them is, as Andreas touched upon, young people have less experience, they have less know-how, they have weaker networks in finding employment and desirable employment for them. They're very new to the labour market. And our question is, what schools can do to reduce the risk of youth unemployment, to increase the likelihood of having better transitions from education into employment, particularly at this time when the labour market is so turbulent. So, clearly, many people are aware that guidance has become more and more of relevance to people. As Andreas was saying, young people stay in education longer, they have more decisions to make, and those decisions are more difficult as the labour market becomes more dynamic. And earlier this year, the OECD with the European Commission, with CEDEFOP, with the International Labour Organization, UNESCO, and the European Training Foundation, published a joint leaflet on the importance of investing in career guidance, particularly within the pandemic. But we see there's lots of policy interest in this, but across the whole of this area, there's always been a problem about understanding what really works. And there's been a lack of strong longitudinal evidence, and that's what the Career Readiness Project has been designed to overcome. So I'm going to hand over here to my colleague Catalina, who's going to take you through the methodology and the results, and I'll join you back again in about 10 minutes' time.
Thanks, Anthony. So before we showed you the results, we wanted to describe the methodology that we used for this project. So what we did was a review of national longitudinal data sets to identify teenage indicators of career readiness. So we didn't create our own data sets. We didn't do our own data collection. What we did was use existing national longitudinal data sets that follow cohorts of students since they're teenagers into adulthood. And we focused specifically on data sets that had data available when students were first around 15 years old, and then when they were later around 25 years old and already working. And here, by indicators of career readiness, we mean what attitudes, what experiences, what thinking processes can we identify at the age of 15 that are associated with positive labor outcomes later on. So to investigate this, we developed 3 separate working papers. And in the first one, we did a review of the existing literature. At the same time as there are existing data sets, there is already existing literature. So we reviewed it. It exists mainly in Australia, the United Kingdom, and the United States. And based on this, we identified a first set of potential indicators of career readiness. And we complemented this with our own analysis. So in the second working paper, we used PISA data from Australia, Denmark, and Switzerland that had then been followed up by these countries with their own national longitudinal studies. And we focused specifically on the indicators that were related with thinking about the future. And the great thing from a methodological perspective was that these data were comparable because it was all PISA data, even though it was from different waves. And we could analyze it in-house, and we could analyze it as one set of analysis altogether. And in the third working paper, we want to explore even further what more information could we get? How could we extend this to countries where we didn't have previous information, or also to countries where we had some previous information, but we extended it to new data sets or new waves of the data sets, or to other indicators that had not been already looked at. So we looked some more into Australia, the United Kingdom, and the United States, but we also looked into Canada, China, Germany, Korea, and Uruguay, that were countries we didn't have any data from. And here in total, we looked at 10 data sets from 8 countries. And the approach we used here was to hire an external expert that was an expert on each of these data sets, that also understood the local context very well, and that spoke the local language so they can really have a look at the questionnaires. Next slide, please. Thank you. And here you can see the list of the data sets that we use. It's just a summary. Please, if you really want the details of the specific waves and that kind of information, we have it in our working papers. But this is so you have an overall idea of the kind of data we were looking at. So the first column shows what country is the data from. The second shows the data collection period that we focused on. And most of the data is from the 2000s. We have some exceptions. So the oldest data that we have is from BCS in the United Kingdom. So you can see there that the collection period was from 1996 from 2004. So that's our oldest data set. And our most recent data sets are from Australia and China. In the case of Australia, our data collection period is from 2010 to 2019. And in China, it's from 2012 to 2018. The following column shows what survey was used for the baseline data collection. And then the next one, what age were the students at the baseline data collection? In most cases, it was around 15. There were some exceptions, as you can see. Then we show what survey did we use for the follow-up data collection. So in cases such as Australia, you can see that one data set was used for the baseline data collection, in this case PISA, and another for the follow-up survey. But in other cases, such as China, it's always the same survey. It's CFPS, different waves of it. Then we also specify the age at the last follow-up. In most cases, it was around 25. There are some exceptions. And lastly, we also specify the sample size at the last follow-up. And here we had quite a bit of variation. So we have a pretty big sample, which I don't see in the slide. I don't know if you see it cut also, but it's one of the data sets from the United States. That was the biggest data set that we have. And the smallest one was in the case of China, when we only had 1,210 cases for the indicators linked with experience in the future. Next slide, please. So this was the methodological approach that we used. We had 14 potential indicators of career readiness. We identified them thanks to the literature review. In most cases, we already had some kind of existing evidence from previous studies of longitudinal studies that they work as indicators of career readiness. In a couple of cases, based on other literature, we think they could work. So we're really exploring it for the first time. And we grouped them in 3 areas. We had 3 outcomes. So when we refer to positive or better adult labor outcomes, we mean 3 very specific things. We mean need, salary, and career satisfaction. So the positive outcome here is that people are either working or studying, that they have higher salaries, and they have higher career satisfaction. And this last element is very important for us because it refers to overall well-being. So of course, people need to have a job. Of course, it's nice to have a higher salary, but there's also another element, another kind of element involved that has to do with the satisfaction that you have with your career. Unfortunately, this outcome is not so present in most of the data sets. It's more difficult to measure and it's more difficult to find. Then we also want to highlight that all the results that we show here used controls. So we know what kind of background characteristics typically influence school to work transitions, and we controlled for them as much as we could. In the case of the second working paper, because we were using PISA data, we could use exactly the same variables for everyone. So we used gender, socioeconomic status using the PISA index, academic achievement in PISA in maths, immigrant status, and study program. In the case of the third working paper, we were limited by what information was available in each data set. So while each data set did use a series of controls, or they had that information available, they were not exactly the same variables. They were not asked at exactly the same way. So for example, socioeconomic variables are different according to the countries. But we always try to include gender, some measure of socioeconomic status and academic performance, and also some other variables when they were available. With regards to analytical techniques, we basically use inferential statistics and regressions. So in the second working paper, we used OLS. In the third working paper, the specific analytical techniques were up to each expert. So they may have used different inferential statistics, and they used either OLS or logistic regressions. Next slide, please. And we would also like to be very upfront with the limitations that are of different natures. So the first limitation is that the data is necessarily old. We're looking at what 15-year-olds were doing quite a while ago, maybe 10 years ago, maybe 15 years ago. Another limitation is that because we're using data sets that are out there, they don't always have the information we would like to have. So particularly for some indicators, information was only available in some of the longitudinal studies. So this is a limitation because when we say we found evidence, say, in 2 countries, in many cases, it's because we just don't have information from the rest. So we don't really know if these things work or not because we don't always have enough information. At the same time, some data sets were incredibly rich, and here we focused only on the elements that were comparable among data sets. As I said before, the data sets for the third working paper were analyzed by different experts using different methodological approaches. So this isn't one integrated piece of analysis, it's actually separate pieces of analysis. And another kind of limitation that we have tried to approach, and we will continue trying to approach in the future, is that the available data is concentrated in some countries, in some kind of countries. Next slide, please. And here you can see the overview of our results. So we have these 14 potential candidates, 14 indicators of career readiness that may work or not. And we have identified that 11 of them can be confirmed as indicators of career readiness. So by this we mean, if this attitude, this activity, this thinking process is happening at around age 15, we can see it is associated with better adult labor outcomes later on. It may be with not being neat, with having a better salary, or with having an increased satisfaction with their careers. And we expect this to happen in at least 3 countries for us to confirm this as an indicator. So if we have many studies, but they're all from the same country, that's not good enough for us. It has to be there in at least 3 countries. So you can see here also the 3 areas that we have: exploring the future, experiencing the future, thinking about the future. First, we list the indicators we have been able to confirm. And then you will see there the thing that says improbably. Those are the indicators where we have some evidence for, but we do not yet have evidence in 3 countries, so we cannot yet confirm them. And here I would like to run through the specific results that we had in each area. So the first one is exploring the future. And here we have grouped activities that schools typically do to help students visualize their potential futures. And here we have been able to confirm 5 indicators of career readiness. So the first one that we have is career conversations. This isn't very fancy. It just means, has the student had the opportunity to talk with someone about the future work, maybe the different path that can take him there. And this conversation can happen with a teacher, with a guidance counselor, with a friend, with a neighbor, with anybody. The second column shows that we have identified 10 studies in total that look into this. So here we're incorporating both the previous existing literature and our own original analysis. And we see also that these 10 studies come from 6 different countries. And our conclusion is that we have evidence in 7 out of these 10 studies that confirm career conversations as an indicator of career readiness. If a 15-year-old has had these conversations with someone, it is associated with better labor adult outcomes later on. Then we specify what countries do we find these associations in. And when we have highlighted them in bold, it means that our own new analysis confirms this. When it's not in bold, it comes from previous analysis. And we also have an example in each case of what does this mean? What's like the size of this effect? So in this case, we see that in the United States, individuals who had conversations about their future after leaving compulsory education by the age of 15 with a mother, father, and adult close relative were 1.48 times less likely to be neat at age 25. And we have phrased it in this very specific way because this is how this specific questionnaire phrased the question. Then the second indicator is engaging with people in work through career talks or job fairs. Here we refer to having a first-hand encounter with people from the world of work. So sometimes the people go to the schools and do career talks there. Sometimes the students go to job fairs. Here we found evidence in 4 out of the 7 available studies to confirm this as an indicator of career readiness. And we can see the example in Uruguay, individuals who had attended a career talk by age 15 were 3 percentage points less likely to be neat at age 25. Then we have workplace visits or job shadowing, the opportunity to actually going to a place of work and seeing how this happens. We have found evidence in 4 out of 8 studies that confirm this as an indicator of career readiness. Then we have application and interview skills development activities. So this refers to specific training for when you have to find a job. Are students trained to write a CV, to fill in an application form, to know how to face an interview? Here you can see we have less available information, only 4 studies in total, but 3 out of these 4 confirm this as an indicator of career readiness. And lastly, we have occupationally focused short programs. Here we see there are many studies, 17 studies, but they all come from 3 countries, other countries where these programs are implemented, Australia, Canada, and the United States. And I have to highlight that these programs are not BED programs. So these are occupationally focused short programs within general education. And out of these 17 studies, we have 14 that confirm them as an indicator of career readiness. And lastly, we have 1 indicator that is signaled here as a probably. We only have evidence in 2 countries for it so far. Next slide, please. This area is experiencing the future. It refers to actual first-hand experiences of what does work mean, what is working like. And here we have confirmed 2 indicators of career readiness. The first time is part-time working. So when students are in school and they have the experience of working a few hours a week for pay. Here you see we have a lot of evidence, 27 studies from 6 countries, and 20 of them confirm part-time working as an indicator of career readiness. Then we also have volunteering. Here we are conceptualizing volunteering mostly as the kind of activities you would be typically paid for if you were older. So they are, again, very real life experiences of work. Here we have less studies, 9, but 8 of them confirm this as an indicator of career readiness. And the last one that we have not yet been able to confirm are work placements, also known as internships. Here we only have evidence so far from 2 studies. And the last area that we have, and perhaps my favorite area, is thinking about the future. So here we're not referring to specific activities that schools can do. We're referring to the thinking processes. How well developed is students' plan? How mature is it? Do they have any kind of plan? So all these indicators are glimpses at this of how well developed their plan is. And most of the indicators are based on one question that we ask 15-year-olds. What kind of job do you think you will have when you're around 30 years old? So the first indicator is career certainty. And by this, all we mean is the student able to name a job? If they can name a job, we consider them career certain. So we're not saying here that this is set in stone, that they won't be able to change their plans. Of course, they will be able to change their plans. We just want to check if they have some kind of plan. And we have a lot of information here. We have 20 studies, and 15 of them confirm that students who are career certain at around age 15 have better labor adult outcomes later on. We also have career ambition as a confirmed indicator. So here what we do is we see if this work that they want to have, is it professional or managerial or not? And if it is, we identify this as career ambition. And here we have 15 out of the 19 available studies that confirm this as an indicator of career readiness. Ambitious students have better labor adult outcomes later on. Then we have career alignment. So this means to what extent the career plans, the work plans are aligned with the plans for study. So for example, if a student says he wants to be an engineer, but he's not really planning on going to university, that is misalignment. And that is what most of the data sets focus on. Are students misaligned or not? So again, it's just a glimpse of how well thought out this plan is. And here we have 9 out of 11 available studies that confirm this as an indicator of career readiness. And the last one is instrumental motivation towards school. So this means, to what extent do students think that their school experience today is going to be useful for their plans for the future? We're not asking you, do I enjoy going to school? Do I like going to school? That's not a question. It's, do you think school is useful for you? In some cases, this is asked the other way around. Do you think school is a waste of time? And we have here 13 out of 15 available studies that confirm this as an indicator of career readiness. So students who see a link between what they're doing today in school and the plans for the future have a better adult labor outcomes later on. And finally, we have another indicator we have not yet been able to confirm. We have evidence in 2 countries. This is career originality. And here what we are looking at is, to what extent is this plan original? Meaning, the job mentioned by the student, is it among the 10 jobs both mentioned by his cohort in his specific country or not? So if we say not, we say, okay, this is career originality. And we only have evidence so far in 2 countries, but the thinking behind this is that, again, this may reflect more maturity, thinking a little bit outside the box, outside of the most 10 obvious choices. Maybe it reflects a better knowledge of what's out there. Next slide, please. And to finalize, I would like to share this slide, basically because, as I mentioned before, we didn't always have as much information as we would have liked. The data sets were not created with this purpose in mind, but Canada was pretty much the researcher's dream, because out of the 14 indicators that we looked at, they had information on 12 of them, which was great for our purposes. And the other thing we wanted to highlight is how these indicators really work in Canada. So out of the 12 indicators that we looked at, we found that 11 of them actually work as indicators in Canada. And here we wanted to show you how in some cases this was associated with not being neat, in other cases it was associated with higher earnings, and in some cases it was actually associated with both things. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Catalina.
Okay, and I'll pick up from here. Thank you. Thanks so much, Catalina. And I want to introduce you to a few slides from our PISA study. These all come from the 2018 wave of PISA, where 15-year-olds in 79 sort of countries and economic regions completed assessments. And we asked them lots of questions, and there are different surveys, so we don't have all the data from every country. But we have, for many countries, we have data about the extent to which young people are embodying these indicators. And I also want to start off with part-time working. And I think we can see the variation across countries. In some countries over on the left, it's relatively uncommon for young people to work part-time alongside their full-time studies. In others, it's very common. And we do know that in at least some countries, part-time working is reducing as technology changes, as young people stay focused on their education. And in these circumstances, I think we can't just rely on this part-time working to prepare young people for their full-time work in adulthood. And similarly, if we look at volunteering, again, we have quite a range of different experiences. And again, particularly maybe in Southern European countries, we have relatively low participation rates. In other countries, the United States and Canada and Indonesia, we see many young people volunteering. But when we look at the indicators in a bit more detail, some really interesting things sort of come out, and some things which I think we're concerned about. This is the career misalignment data which we have. So in PISA, we ask young people what type of job they expect to have, an occupational expectation at age 30. And then we classify those jobs, whether they're a professional managerial occupation or not. And I can tell you across the OECD that over 60% of young people now say that they plan to work in a professional managerial role. That's up from 50% 20 years ago. We also ask them if they plan to attend tertiary education. Do they plan to go to university? And we kind of find that quite a high proportion of young people will be classified as misaligned. They plan to have the sort of job which you'd normally expect to go to university for. But the thing which we really want to focus here is the difference between the low performers and the high performers. And we have a very high so a much higher percentage of low performers on the PISA assessments in mathematics and reading and science than we do for the higher performers. It's about 4 times higher across the OECD. And that raises concern if we have young people at age 15 who are perhaps going to may not go on to have a secondary education or may finish their education there and then go straight into the labour market. Are they doing so with their eyes open? Do they really understand what they need to do to achieve their job goals? We can look as well at this question about career conversations. And it seems such a simple thing that, have young people actually have a conversation with somebody about a job they'd like to do in the future when they finish education. And we find typically, yes, 80% on average of young people across the OECD, the countries we've got data for, say they have had such a conversation. About 20% haven't. And in some countries, it's close to 30%. And we find that, particularly for those lower achievers and young people from more disadvantaged social groups, they're much less likely to say they had such a conversation. And in those conversations, we could imagine them perhaps getting new and useful information as they explore possibilities for themselves. But also, it's an indicator for the school that through that process, they're actively thinking about, they're critically examining their possible futures. They're talking to people. It's in their minds, not simply drifting through the education system. And we found further, I suppose, cause for concern when we looked, again, using the PISA data at combinations. So, this is an example. Have young people participated in 3, core career guidance activities? Have they spoken to a career advisor? Have they been to a workplace visit? And have they been to a job fair? Have they done all 3? And we find that by the age of 15 across the OECD, fewer than 15% have done all 3. And we would expect certainly, by their indicators, for all young people to visit workplaces, take part in job fairs or career talks by this age. But then we did something kind of interesting. We kind of mashed up this data. We went back to that ratio of youth to unemployment. And so here you see the how many times greater unemployment rates are for young people under the age of 24 compared to people over the age of 25. And then we looked at their participation in these guidance activities, 3 guidance activities. And we see a clear pattern that young people who are more engaged with career guidance while at school are living in economic systems in countries where the ratio of youth to unemployment is lower, where they are being more competitive for the available jobs. So when we try and make sense of what's happening here, I think this is our analysis that globally young people, they're staying in education long before, there are more decisions to make than ever before. But those decisions are becoming more difficult because the labour market is becoming more turbulent. But societies, they expect young people to show personal agency through their transitions. But in order to do so, they need access to guidance resources. Now, the career readiness indicators highlight resources, tools, which can make a difference in these transitions. And I think from the work that we've been looking at, we'd argue that effective guidance creates a virtuous circle of students exploring, experiencing, thinking about their futures in order to be able to clarify, confirm, and enable their transitions. And I just want to show a couple of slides to illustrate that relationship. What we see here is a number of commonplace guidance activities, which are probably familiar to many of you who work in schools or work in policy in this area. And we knew from PISA whether young people had said they participated in them. But then we looked at the relationship, if they had done so, whether they like to be more certain, whether they like to be more ambitious, whether they like to be more aligned, whether they like to be showing greater instrumental motivation, seeing that connection between education and later employment. And controlling for their characteristics, we find a pretty strong pattern here in saying that these things are related to more mature career thinking. And I can drill down into that by looking at the example of career conversations. And we look here in red, the young people who have talked to someone about a job they'd like to do in the future. And below that, young people who hadn't. And then we see, what percentage of those are aligned or misaligned. And we find lower levels of misalignment. We find lower levels of career uncertainty as well. And we see the way this becomes a virtuous circle, that the more sophisticated, more mature the career thinking of a young person is, the better place they're going to be able to take advantage of the opportunities which their schools provide for them to further explore and experience labour markets. So here are some conclusions for you. our new evidence from multiple countries shows that guidance is a central role to play in enabling better employment outcomes, reducing risks for young people as they're going through education into employment. We find that substantial new evidence here underpinning 11 confirmed indicators of career readiness. I think PISA tells us that too few students are career ready at this point. And because teenage attitudes about work are so important to outcomes, and because those attitudes, that thinking process takes such a long time to develop, guidance should begin well before the age of 15, and of course continue after that. Young students from a young age should extensively explore the world of work through their schools with rich episodes of employer engagement. They should also gain first-hand experiences of the working world. We highlight here volunteering and part-time work particularly. Effective systems will encourage and enable and require young people to think critically and continually about their futures in work. We recognise that more research is required here. We'd love to have more data, but I think we've done as much as we can with what we've done. And this all has some questions for schools. And as we finish the project, we've highlighted these questions linked to the indicators. We're asking whether the schools regularly enable students to engage with people in work through career fairs and career talks. Do schools have programs or workplace visits and job shadowing to enable all students to critically investigate workplaces for themselves? Does your school teach students how to apply for a job, including interview practice? Do schools help students reflect on their existing and planned education and training choices in light of what they're learning about their career ambitions and requirements of desired employment? Do schools know if students are engaged in career conversations about their plans? And we know from a number of countries, the Netherlands in particular, that there are policies which can help encourage and enable cultures of career conversations with subject teachers and with family members, as well as with guidance counsellors. 7, does your school have confidence that all students will have first-hand experiences of work before leaving secondary education? And we find that, we'd recommend the opportunity to experience work of interest for young people on 2 or more occasions. Going on, does your school help students to prepare for and reflect on their first-hand experiences of work? It's one thing to do it, it's another thing to reflect on what's been learnt in it. Does the school know about the occupational expectations of students? And if students are uncertain, do schools have a process for investigating what's behind such uncertainty? Moving on, do schools know how ambitious students are? Do schools know if students' occupational and educational plans are aligned or misaligned? And does your school know if students are able to see a clear relationship between their education experiences, what they're doing in the classroom, and what might happen later in employment? So these are our next steps. We plan to carry on focusing on identifying international practice, which is aligned with these results, exploring technologies and guidance, and investigating how guidance can enhance access to particularly green jobs, which are projected to grow in their millions over the years ahead. But also to address inequalities, because we know certainly that young people come into guidance situations with very different levels of resource from their social background. In our evaluation, after this, we're going to ask you, if you have examples of practice which you'd like to share. We also ask you what you think about the indicators. We have lots of papers and policy briefs which we're making available. You find them all on our website here. If you type in OECD career readiness to Google, you'll find your way there. We have a free monthly newsletter, which you can also sign up for, and we put all our papers and results out on Twitter. So I'm going to stop there and look forward to the discussion. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Anthony and Catalina. And what I find really fascinating is that it's not rocket science, actually. What you can do is, bring your research actually in quite concrete questions that schools should be asking themselves to sort of see, how they can actually leverage better career experiences. But while I encourage everyone, post your questions in the chat, I want to start with our panel. And let me turn to you, Gert, first. You are president of the International Association for Education and Vocational Guidance, a professional body for guidance counselors all around the world. And let me ask you, what do career or guidance counselors make of the findings that you just saw? Do the predictors of effective career guidance chime with your experience? Are there things that we should be looking at in research? And how can we ensure that guidance is enriched by effective employer engagement?
Yes, thank you, Andreas. But let me first send you my sincere congratulations to Anthony and his project team, and to you, Andreas, with the fine harvest of this project. Well, it's very important and relevant for the career guidance community. And I think they will welcome the results very much, and for several reasons. I think a part of the practitioners will be encouraged by the results, because they have now hard proof, scientific proof. I know there are limitations, of course, that's always the case, but anyway, hard academic proof for their services to be effective. And this gives confidence, professional confidence in the daily work. We are doing the right thing and we do it good. So it also provides arguments in the discussions with principals, with school boards, employers, etc. And because in discussions, there will come up at a certain moment the question, why should we invest time and money in your services? Well, with the results of this project, you have some firm arguments why they should. And it also encourages the practitioners to do more, as one of the results is that still there is a lot work to be done. So there is confidence and encouragement out of the results. And another thing is that it also gives practitioners direction and a focus on in their service and activities. So not only we can talk about effectiveness, but efficiency, because many practitioners have limited resources in terms of time and money. So it gives hold, it gives direction. A third argument is that, or reason for, let's say, the warm welcome of this project results, is that it's clear that guidance activities with a focus on career readiness contributes not only to career development and well-being of young people, but let's say on an other level, an overall goal is that it contributes to a more balanced labor market and social economic development of people on regional and national level. So practitioners can shine now on a very other, a different stage. And that's very important. It makes guidance more visible and relevant also. And the last one, if I still have time, a last positive contribution of this project is that the results provides direction to the professional development of practitioners. IAVG has launched recently a member survey about the needs and interest for practitioners for their own professional development. So the results may infuse, let's say, the development of our program for professional development. So I think that are some reasons why I think we are happy with this project. And now your second question, how to ensure, how can we ensure that guidance will be enriched effectively by employer engagement? Well, the first precondition, I think, is that it always has to come from both sides. From, on one hand, the guidance community and education, and the other side, the employers. So I think one important precondition is to become friends, in fact. So to meet each other more regularly, to getting to know each other, and like each other, that you, let's say, know more about the world of the other party in this project, in this kind of projects. That's, I think, very helpful, this to embed the relation. And I think it should not be a love affair, because I think the information that goes between two parties should stay objective and authentic, and should not lose objectivity. Well, guidance professionals should also be well prepared and trained to organize employment engagement and to assist employers in preparing their activities. They really should know, my colleagues, how to do this and organize this in an effective way. So there's, let's say, an item for their own professional development. Employers should be aware of the added value engaging in guidance. Better prepared and motivated applicants and young talent, but in general also a more balanced labor market, as I said before. So not just promoting their own company, that's a kind of a pitfall in their enthusiasm perhaps, but they should provide authentic and objective information and experiences to students. So not only the glamour and glitter and success, but also some other sides, perhaps even negative sides of vocations and what's happening in a specific branch. So far, some ideas about how to ensure employer engagement in this kind of projects.
Thanks so much, Gert. And I think it's very interesting, like how you highlight, how we can make career guidance with data not less of an art, but more of a science, and actually provide some real, evidence to support also the professional development of experts and professionals in this field. I think these are really interesting thoughts. Let me turn to you, Deirdre. You are co-editor of the British Journal of Guidance and Counselling. You also have advised many governments on the delivery of effective career guidance. So what do you think education systems should and can make out of those findings? How do you think these findings could be taken on board in a more systematic way in the design and delivery of education?
Well, first of all, I'd like to say that I think education systems around the world, and indeed the employment systems as well, will really welcome this very thought-provoking piece of research. And I'd like to congratulate you, Andreas and Anthony and the team on this authoritative and robust career readiness research program. And Hanke JP Morgan, thank you for funding the study. I think the main point I would make is that whilst in the northern and the southern hemispheres, governments are tackling many different issues, there are some things that really unite them when it comes to policy development. So first of all, education systems around the world are changing, and a number of major disruptive forces will transform the lives of young people, and they will create a set of new social and economic risks, but also opportunities. There's an urgent need to prevent inequality, to reduce the widening and the gap of disadvantage that already exists. And I think this set of papers reminds us of the importance of not just theory and evidence base, but real practical steps that can help reduce that gap in inequality. I think most importantly, young people are the nation's future workforce, wherever you are in the world. And so successful engagement of young people in education and the labour market is crucial, not only for economic prosperity and well-being, but also for social cohesion. And so I think governments around the world will respond differently to the findings. Some will really love the case studies that are within the papers that actually provide some really powerful evidence. If we look at Korea, for example, where we know that students who have visits to the workplace were 23% less likely to be unemployed than those who don't. So I think really a key message which governments around the world should not ignore, and we can compel them through this strong evidence base, is that for those young people who can explore, experience, and think about the future world of work as part of their schooling, they will be better placed to successfully manage their transitions into it. Career readiness is a key concept that we need to embrace and do more on. I think the second thing I would also say is that what this piece of research does powerfully is that it reminds us that for young people who participate in career guidance, and whether we call it career counselling as they do in Ireland or career education, the reports clearly define what they mean by career guidance, which is fantastic. But we know that career guidance by young people has been associated with wage premiums, with lower rates of unemployment, with greater career satisfaction, as well as increased academic motivation and more positive attitudes, towards schooling. So I think we hear around the world in government circles concern about learning loss and how these students are going to catch up. And I think career readiness in this research shows that this is another way to accelerate the learning gains that can be achieved for young people. And I think it's an easy read for the policymakers, for the practitioners, and for the teachers. It's got a good balance of key concepts and practical ways of doing things. And I think for me, three things that jumped out as key principles enshrined in all of the reports is that the theory, the research and the practice and the evidence now is there. And it's up to the schools and their partners to be purposeful. That what these research reports do is it says you can be purposeful as an educationalist or as an employer working with education. And that purposefulness is about designing for a specific context internally within a school, externally with your stakeholders, and most importantly, to have a good understanding of the cultural context in which you apply these principles, these concepts, and indeed these 14 key questions. I think the second aspect is that career readiness cannot be left to chance, that it has to be planned within a school and as thoughtfully and in advance as possible. And thirdly, it has to be proportionate to the needs of the school, to the stakeholders involved. And I really like in the report that what's introduced is a reminder of the importance of experience of and exposure to the world of work. And very few people talk about part-time work now or volunteering. And I think that what we've got now is a new conversation that can begin around part-time work, volunteering, enterprise as part of that as well. So for me, for governments, those are some of the key things. And there are challenges as well, which I've noted 5 key challenges. If I've got time, I'll quickly give you the headlines on those.
Thanks so much, Deirdre. I think particularly the point you make is the power of career guidance really leveling the playing field, opening sort of minds of young people, particularly from disadvantaged backgrounds, about futures that they might not see in their immediate social environment. Actually, but there was a comment in the chat just almost arguing the opposite. Isn't it true that career guidance, internships, volunteering, workplace visits are usually much more accessible to students from wealthier backgrounds? Isn't that maybe that it actually reinforces disparities rather than moderated? How would you respond to that?
Well, I think often what we do is we put these buckets of experience into labels such as work shadowing or workplace visits or work experience or volunteering. And I think that what this report and series of reports does is encourage us to think about young people's exposure to and experiences of the world of work, whether it's inside the schooling system or as they transition outside of the schooling system. And I would argue that if we know that internships and workplace visits work for the most wealthy, perhaps those in private schools, then it's a public good and it's in our public interest that we get more of those experiences freely available to those most disadvantaged and most in need.
Yeah, so it's clearly that education systems have some homework to do here to actually make those experiences more widely accessible.
Yeah.
Let me turn to you, David. You are professor of psychology at Boston College, and I think most of us have read your books and articles on, education, guidance, and work. Share with us why teenage career thinking is so important and how it relates to the activities, but also the experiences of young people, and then also what the implications for challenging social inequalities through career guidance could be.
Thank you, Andreas. Thank you for the kind introduction. I want to thank Anthony and the rest of the OECD team for developing this really extraordinary research, and also to acknowledge that I have been involved as a consultant on some of these papers and editor. So I just want to be transparent about that. And I also want to thank the support of JP Morgan, which has made this project really, really possible. So I will share my thoughts, and I'll actually also share my screen. So I have a few slides to present. Okay, you should be able to see the full slide now, right?
Yes.
Okay, great. So I am going to cover exactly what Andreas so succinctly summarized here. I'm going to talk about why longitudinal findings are important and how these inequalities that we're mentioning actually play a role in the career development process. And Anthony asked me to discuss from the perspective of from my background as a psychologist, what actually happens in these kind of systemic interventions? What's happening at the individual level? So I'll offer some ideas about it, and I'll conclude with some implications for the project. So the inequalities, clearly this is the elephant in the room, and fortunately found some good graphics for this on the internet. But clearly the inequalities issue is not a background issue, it's a foreground issue. And my thinking about this is, and I kind of confirm the comments of one of the participants, which is having access to some of these career guidance interventions that involve being in the workplace, trying internships, trying things out, in some ways is a kind of index of privilege. For example, taking unpaid internships, which is a big issue in the US, that's become another index of privilege. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't do it. It means that this is an area where, as governments, as policymakers, that we need to do more in trying to equalize the playing field, because right now it is not equal. And at the rate things are going with the growing nature of inequality, things will become increasingly less equal. But I will try to infuse this thought throughout my comments. Let me also talk about the importance of longitudinal results. Anthony Mann and his colleagues have done something really brilliant here, which is to take existing longitudinal data and to use that as a resource to understand the impact of career education and career guidance and career counseling interventions. It's really important to use longitudinal research because it really does give us a chance to see how things go across some time. The interventions that are described, in my view, represent intentional actions that do facilitate developmental progress. So globally, the findings do support that when we take career guidance at the more macro level and at the more community level, the interventions do make a difference, and they make a substantive difference at times. We also have learned from these studies that teenage career-related activities and attitudes are linked to better adult employment outcomes. This is not a new finding. It's been a finding that's been around in our field longer than I've been, and I've been around a long time, so that's a long time. So let's talk about, I'm going to go over each of the three clusters of findings. The first one having to do with exploring the future. So what actually happens in exploration? First off, when we provide youth with an opportunity to explore, we help them to learn about themselves. We also help them to learn about how they could exist in a future, and we also help them learn about the world of work. And the way that this works, in my view, is that it allows young people to engage in role rehearsals, these internal dialogues with ourselves or monologues about, well, can I see myself doing this? And what would that actually be like? And the more youth are exposed to the world of work, especially in a way where it feels real to them, and also in a way where they do see people like themselves, which is a very powerful way of trying to reduce some of the pernicious impact of inequalities, that does help people to engage in these role rehearsals. So it allows us to learn about the world in a very vivid and psychologically meaningful way. Let's talk a little bit about experience in the future. So experience in the future in some ways captures the notion of experiential learning. And I've done a fair amount of research on work-based learning, on the whole process of trying to get youth out into the workplace. And in the US, this has been used a lot, particularly among students who are marginalized or who come from really disenfranchised backgrounds. So when we get people out into the workplace, if we're getting them into a decent workplace, not an indecent workplace, but we're getting them into a workplace that does capture some of the professional managerial jobs that Anthony mentioned at the outset, in that sense, the workplace becomes real and it becomes visceral. People really feel it. Also, as we get youth into the workplace, social capital and social connections emerge. And finally, a pathway is constructed in one's mind between the present and the future. People begin to develop this kind of psychological cognitive roadmap where they can really envision themselves in a future that feels hopeful. So the third cluster of factors is thinking about the future. And actually here I will say, I think the findings in this area are really very innovative. I'm very familiar with the academic career development literature. And I could say that some of these concepts are discussed a bit in the academic literature. Some of them are not. So I really encourage these reports to get disseminated as widely as possible. So what happens in thinking about one's future? We begin to construct our expectations for the future, and we begin to develop dreams for the future. Also, the link between school and work and career is really forged internally. We develop, again, these cognitive pathways. And then this process, which psychologists call an internalization process. And internalization is discussed in motivational theories, also psychoanalytic and psychodynamic theories, cognitive theories. We kind of create mental images of where we want to be and how we want to proceed to get there. And that can become very motivating, especially if these are formed out of our own experience and that we realistically see ourselves there. And finally, in thinking about the future, mindsets are shifted optimally into flexible mindsets. And that's a critical aspect. The literature on mindsets is very clear that the more people are able to see the world as flexible and mutable, the more hopeful they will be, and the more they will engage in agentic action to help create these futures that they're thinking about. Oh, whoops. So let me discuss the implications here. One is that schools, employers, teachers, and counselors can have a major impact on adolescents. And I think these findings really support the ramping up of career counseling, career guidance, so that it includes a lot of opportunities for people to learn about the world of work in a real and accessible way. Also, these findings underscore the importance of reducing inequalities, because we can see in these findings that students who have access to some or most of these resources tend to do reasonably well, and those that don't may often struggle. And we do know that that world of work out there is highly unpredictable. Who would have thought a year ago we'd have a great resignation? Hard to predict it, but youth need to be as ready as possible for this, and society also needs to be very ready to make changes to open and welcome everyone. Another important fact is career development is a community responsibility. I encourage employers, and I love these comments about employer engagement. We need employers involved, we need schools, and we also need government support and the support of the nonprofit sector to help create these opportunities. It can't all fall on the backs of career guidance professionals or teachers. And one essential role of communities is to ensure equal access to these important predictors. So on that note, I want to thank Anthony and his colleagues for inviting me on this project. I look forward to our continued collaboration. And for me, it's been very inspiring to be involved with this from the beginning, well, at least from the beginning is when I started it, and to see the amazing progress that we've been making. So thank you all.
Thanks so much, David. And what stuck with me is, the development of viable dreams, as you call it, and cognitive pathways between the present and the future. One of the most disturbing outcomes from our PISA assessment for me was actually that you have between 30 and 50% of 15-year-olds who basically aspire to jobs that are at the high risk of automation. Basically, we educate young people for our past, of not their future. And I think your idea of, how can we build that kind of mental bridges between the future as we anticipated and what's happening today, really very, very inspiring. Let me turn to you, Sarina. You are the Executive Director of the Canadian Career Development Foundation and also board member of the International Center for Career Development and Public Policy. And as we all saw in our indicators, actually that kind of match between young people's aspirations and the future of work was actually very strong in the case of Canada. Is that an indication of good data simply, or is it an indication of good policy? I'd like to get your thoughts on this. What has Canada done differently from other places in this field?
Thanks, Andreas. I have to say that I wish the verb tense in your question was different and you were asking me about the wonderful things that Canada is doing now rather than what we were doing 20, 25 years ago. But I fear that I wouldn't have quite so much to say. I think Canada looks good on paper still. We have some good policies in place, but those policies are being largely ignored. When I look back to 20, 25 years ago, we didn't have much on paper, but there was some real magic happening in Canada in the career education space in terms of supporting young people to dream and explore and reflect and actively build toward their careers. So I guess in some ways your question, Andreas, is what was the secret sauce? What really made a difference in terms of young people in Canada and that data? And, I've reflected on it, and I think it boils down to 6 key elements. The first is there was a mechanism for linking career education outcomes to curricular outcomes. And so in that way, career education became embedded in education that was recognized academically. We had a document called the Blueprint for Life Work Designs, and it articulated in quite a lot of detail the knowledge, skills, and attitudes that should result from quality career education. And those career outcomes were mapped to curricular academic outcomes. And all of a sudden, there was a mechanism for embedding career education right across subjects. Academically across the school curriculum. And that elevated career education from being a fringe activity to being something that was central to education. So that's number one. Number two is this really led to the notion that career education is actually a specialized area of activity, and therefore it was necessary to train people to do it well. And so there was this explosion of training for educators, for guidance counselors, and indeed for folks working within departments of education in government to help them to become specialized in career development. And so we had this little army of career specialists scattered across the country in schools, in government departments who had expertise, who understood what career development was and what made it so valuable and important. And they became champions. And in schools, they became coaches to their colleagues to really support teachers right across the curriculum to have career conversations and to embed career themes into whatever subject they were teaching. So, you know, having trained and energized career leaders in schools, communities, and government departments is, I believe, firmly a linchpin for strong career outcomes for youth. So that was number 2. Number 3 was an investment in actually creating some good programs, tools, and resources to support career development. You know, it's obviously incredibly important to have the strong people and qualified people, but it really helps if they also have great tools at their fingertips. And, you know, we had a massive national research and development initiative about 25, 28 years ago that invested over 15 million, which was an embarrassment of wealth in those days, in the development of a whole range of counseling, career development resources for youth, focused on specific career themes and focused on specific underrepresented groups. And so what we, you know, and we had programs like The Real Game, which some of you might be familiar with as well, that was developed around that time, that was tailored, purpose made to give educators something so that they didn't have to cobble together something themselves. If they wanted to do something in the career space, there were practical tools that they could grab and start to integrate into their classroom experiences. The fourth, having supports for young people to work. There was a network of youth employment centers across the country, specialized career centers in communities that youth could go to for summer work, for work after they graduated. There were subsidies for employers to hire youth. So lots and lots of support for young people to get out there and get that part-time work, to get those summer jobs, and to get opportunities to actually taste different jobs in the labor market. Number 5 was similar, but a little different. There were all kinds of programs that supported young people to spread their wings and experience life outside of school. For Canadian colleagues, as part of this session, programs like Covacevich, Youth Service Canada, that enabled young people to travel, to live for a few months in a different part of Canada or a different part of the world, to be involved in a group community project that was giving back to community in some way. These programs enabled young people to volunteer, to do good work in community, and to have some life experience outside of school. And because the staff of those programs were trained in career development, they weren't just having cool experiences. They were supported to reflect on those experiences and to connect those experiences to their own career futures. All of this, those 5 things, to me, added up to something that was much less tangible, but in my view, centrally important. And that's number 6. And maybe the most critical. We had a culture in Canada at that time of celebrating and supporting youth in very visible ways. You know, 20 years in Canada, there was a strong sense that youth and their futures mattered, that youth were indeed our futures as a country, and so of course we should invest in them. I want to emphasize that culture itself, that widespread, pervasive, and very visible belief in youth, I think was an important factor in those youth outcomes. I think that youth felt like the adults in the room had their back and were ready to invest in them. And that's a powerful message for youth. And it's one that couldn't be more important now as youth are facing ever more so complex and challenging futures. Youth need to feel that every adult in the school, in the community, has their back, is invested, not just in ensuring they get good marks, for ensuring that they get to university. Those are just a means to an end. The end game is helping people to conceive and believe in their future and helping them to be skilled architects in building that future. And that's what good career education does. And I think that that's what this really critical research is shining a spotlight on. So thanks.
Thanks so much, Sarina. I think it's very powerful what you raise here. I think particularly your point to develop that kind of trained and energized expertise on so to support career development. And we do that in other areas of education. We train people for years and years to teach Latin or trigonometry, and in those things that actually do matter most in life, whether it's career guidance or, how do you educate your children and so on. We do actually very little. We leave young people very much in the cold. I think the point that you make about supporting youth, being there to help them in that transition, I think it's so important. The point you make of out of school experience, schools are usually very good to keep students inside and the rest of the world outside. Now, how do we build those bridges? How do we create more, openness, better integration of the world of work and the world of education? I think a really, really good question. It's great to see that, a country like Canada, even if it is in the past, I think it's a country that has made that work. And I think that shows us actually it's not a rocket science. Actually, it's something that actually can be done well. And finally, let me turn to you, Hanka. You are the Executive Director of Global Philanthropy at the JP Morgan Foundation, and your support for this project is actually just a part of your much bigger project on new skills at work that you have pursued for actually a number of years by now. What motivated you as an employer to put so much emphasis on the transitions of young people, and how do you view the role of employers in what can they do to enhance these transitions? We have heard, from the perspective of, the supply side, the education side. Where do you see the space for employers to make a real difference?
Thank you, Andreas, and thank you for the invitation. It's a real pleasure to be with you today. It's fantastic to see these thought-provoking insights that the OECD presented today, and also the deep reflections of the previous speakers. I find that really inspiring. So thanks a lot. So let me share a bit about our motivation to join forces with the OECD education team, as well as a range of other partners, and also how we approach it as an employer. So JP Morgan as a firm really is committed to promote a more inclusive economy and expand access to opportunities for a broader share of society. And that's across the 37 global locations in which we live and work. As a company, we really have an ambition to bring all the resources that we have available to this objective. So our expertise, our philanthropic capital and data, as well as business initiatives. And we focus on key pillars of opportunity, jobs and skills, small business resilience, and financial health. Of course, one critical component of this mission is how we can prepare people, especially more marginalized people, for the world of work. And especially at this time, as it's changing more rapidly than ever before. We've already heard it a bit. Digitalization, automation is changing the labor market. Many of the skills profiles, job profiles that are now in demand around data science, around telemedicine, it did not exist a couple of years ago. And also more traditional job profiles are changing. And this trend, of course, has been very much accelerated by the pandemic. So this can be an opportunity to build a more modern economy, but it also raises the need for workers to adapt, to be equipped with digital and transversal skills, and in order to continue to learn and develop. When we look at equity, there are barriers, clearly. So lower skilled workers are less likely to participate in training and access career guidance, yet they're more at risk of automation. And when we look at young people, as we're looking today, on average, they have less insight about the labor market and less practical support and resources from their environment. So these are really the issues that we're aiming to address in order to promote more equitable opportunities, and to do this together with key actors in this field. our way to approach it has been to really start a focused initiative on this topic. So JP Morgan is investing $75 million in career readiness initiatives across the world as part of our broader commitment to the future of work. And our objective really is to enable more young people to gain the insight, experience, and preparation to access further education and real-world work experience that lead to a higher wage and also more secure jobs. So how do we approach it? So first, by supporting innovative, impactful initiatives that really have the potential to achieve structural change in education and training systems. So as an example, earlier this month, we announced a multi-year cooperation with Empieza por Acá and Fundación Bertelsmann, who will present also as part of the conference in the next few days, to help scale enhanced career guidance support and career provision in over 200 schools across Madrid and Catalonia, with a particular focus on students from lower income backgrounds. This builds on years of work, and we really see the potential for this to make a major change in the career guidance system in Spain. Secondly, I mean, we're an employer, as you said, Andreas, we're a global company. So we're really committed to leverage our resources as an employer to provide young people with mentoring and real world work experiences. So over the past few years, we've developed a range of programs that engage JP Morgan employees as mentors and provide students insights into the financial sector. Just a couple, so we have a program called the Schools Challenge that we're running in 10 locations worldwide to provide experiential learning, so really support student teams to develop practical solutions to achieve more sustainability to where they work. And of course, really develop the competencies and career insights along the way. And of course, there's a range of emerging talent programs that we have invested in developing, most notably apprenticeship programs in different locations in the UK and the US, to really, provide those pathways for different students with different interests in their last year of high school and or in college, to really have an introduction to the world of financial services and achieve qualifications. And I would say the third component really is insights and practice. And this is really where we're super excited about this collaboration with the OECD. There's a lot of potential for learning and advancement, particularly in the space of career guidance. It's in many places where we work, it's really underdeveloped, underfunded, but also lacks good insight. So that's where we're really happy to see the OECD team expand the knowledge about what works with solid evidence and making those practical insights available to policymakers and practitioners globally. And of course, the exchange that we're seeing as part of the conference in the next couple of days, it can really help. It can really help develop practice across the globe. So a little bit more on the role of employers. I mean, it's been said before, I think David said it's a community task. And yes, absolutely. So career guidance and supporting young people into the world of work, it can really only be achieved by breaking down the silos between education and the world of work. And this is where, I really look forward to the insights of the next couple of days. From the research, I find it remarkable, really, how seemingly small and few interventions can have a significant impact on young people's career trajectories. But I think what is interesting and how we're convening now in this setting, what's hard is really setting up those models that to deliver career guidance activities sustainably, because it requires resources, it requires a willingness of the community to come together and invest in this. And also the practical tools. For example, when we think about, engaging smaller companies in career guidance who are time poor, who might not have a HR team. There are significant barriers to this. And of course, it's the more vulnerable students that are often hard to reach, that might not live in economic centers, and that would benefit most from these activities. So here, it's really, there's a lot to do. I just want to mention one point in terms of a note of optimism, also in the way forward. So the pandemic clearly has disrupted education and definitely also career guidance in many, many locations, but it's also brought to the fore innovations that we can leverage. So we've seen really a lot of examples of digital and hybrid formats that have come to the fore, and that can really provide an opportunity to offer scalable career guidance offers that might not be dependent on the location of the school, that might not be dependent on individual resources of the schools, and really connect young people with role models and corporates and advice, wherever they are. So thanks, and I look forward to the exchange.
Yeah, thanks, Anka. And when I listen to you, but also to Gerd and Sarina, it seems really that for employers, the value proposition of career guidance is very clear. And there are also lots of tools and approaches that are actually being there. I'd like to turn back to Deirdre once more, because we've heard really that side. But at the beginning, you mentioned there were 5 challenges, 5 kind of strategies that education can do sort of from the supply side. And I think that would be great for us to hear more about that.
Just very briefly, my list of 5 would be: number 1, that there are extreme pressures on schools at the moment because of the pandemic. Safeguarding is one, and mental health and well-being is another. So a big question is, so can schools fit in career readiness when there are these other pressures as well? So I think there's a great opportunity to use this research and to link it to well-being, and there's some interesting work in Wales and in Canada and more recently in Scotland on this. I think the second thing has been touched upon already, which is employer engagement in the curriculum. And I think, as David put it very eloquently, we cannot expect teachers to do it all. It is very much a sort of partnership approach. And certainly in the UK, the pandemic has resulted in employers not being able to physically go into schools to engage in career talks and in fairs. So we're using technology, but the question is, does that have the same impact as meeting a person face to face? I think the third big challenge for schools is equity in careers provision. Who should get the careers support most, given that there are finite resources? And I think role models are essential in the schools in terms of helping address equity in the system, that young people who can't see people like them who have succeeded, I think it's very difficult for them to imagine what their future might look like. The fourth point, very briefly, and it's highlighted in the report, is about young people having an investigative mindset. And I think, again, we've got to step back and have the conversation with policymakers and with educationalists and their partners about how can we make young people more curious about a future that is so uncertain. And I think just the final point really is that whatever we do, we have to ensure that young people can see the relevance of their education to a changing world of work. And I think that's something where we can do a lot more around that conversation that Serena mentioned about young people seeing the relevance of studying maths or the relevance of trigonometry or Latin or whatever. And I think this piece of research actually will trigger those conversations and give us an opportunity to do much more. But they are challenges that we can't overlook.
Thanks so much. I think as Sarina also said before, believing in young people and creating that sense of optimism, that can-do attitude is so important in the time of uncertainty in which we live today. And that brings me to a question, actually, that is someone asks to you, David. Can aspiration outweigh social barriers? Sort of, you painted that big elephant there, but is sort of aspiration, optimism, attitudes, are these effective levers to overcome disadvantage?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the answer is it depends. I think we could all think of, stories of people who've been able to overcome enormous odds and be very successful. I think when you look at the research literature, you look at these data here globally or from an aggregate perspective, people do need the support of the community in order to really reach their dreams. I think there's outliers, the story of Bruce Springsteen is one I think of. He didn't have much social capital at all. Was thrown out of community college and they said he couldn't write. So there's these stories, but I think we have to be careful. I do think that there's a kind of synergistic relationship between a supportive community and the development of viable dreams, as we call them, of aspirations that are meaningful. And I think the supportive community can come in some ways through these guidance and career development education interventions. And that's one way of trying to do things. Equalizing the playing field is a tremendous challenge. And I think that, it's been made much more complicated, of course, by the pandemic. But I do think that we do, we see some movement in some countries of nations making a commitment to try to reduce inequality and being somewhat effective. Then we also see some backsliding. But I think as long as we as a profession center that issue and make that part of who we are, and we advocate for it, I think that'll help to some degree. I hope that's a decent response.
Yeah, thank you. And in fact, our PISA research actually does show quite significant, within and across country relationships between, growth mindset and the value that young people see and, the future in education. So I think this is something certainly worth for us to look at more carefully. Lots of questions coming in, and I have a question for you, Sarina, from one of our participants here. Beyond the instrumental value of career guidance, helping people to find a job and matching their aspirations, what about agency and empowerment, social skills, all those transversal competencies? How do you see sort of career guidance making a difference there? And if there are others who want to respond to this as well.
Deirdre alluded to the connection between career development and factors around mental health and well-being. And, I think that that's the tip of the iceberg. Some of our most recent research was showing very strong connection between quality career services, career development experiences, and both clinically and statistically positive changes in 16 indicators of mental health and well-being. And there's more and more emphasis here in Canada in connecting career development with some of these social emotional learning competencies as well. And I think in some ways we have it completely backwards. We are education. We talk about how do we fit career development into education from the fringes, when in fact, if school is not about preparing young people to have a clear vision and have some confidence to achieve that and build a future for themselves, what the heck is it about? I think that we really do kind of have it a bit backwards. To me, career development is the core of education, and everything we're doing should be supporting young people in believing in their future, in feeling grounded hope, and in knowing that they have the capacity to be architects of their future. And I think when that shift can happen, could be a bit of a revolution in education and a revolution in outcomes as well.
Thanks, Sarina. And related to this, we got a question here from Catalina. Maybe Gert, you can help us with this, or anyone really. how important is it that students stick with the careers they get interested in? Is it sort of more important that students have an aspiration, see a future, or is that the specific aspiration they have really important? What can we say about that? And Gerd, I think you are.
Yeah. Thank you. Well, I really believe aspirations and as David told us, viable dreams are very important. It's the energy, the vitality that comes from that is important. But in addition, of course, capacity, the right capacities, and also the opportunity to make it happen, to realize a career is also are very important elements. So let's say aspirations are the motor of it, of the career, and opportunities provided by the educational system, but also by the labor market and employers should provide, and policymakers should provide the right opportunities. And as I said before, of course, this is very dependent on the typical context where people live, and also specific categories need specific opportunities. I'm sure of that. And about capacity, we can learn and contribute to the capacity of young people to make right choices and how to be the architect of their own career and future, of course. But also other capacities are important, as I said before, like, well, I had the capacity to study hard, but I did not have, when I was a young man, the capacity to, the right social skills to enter other platforms and other stages where I came. So I had to develop that. So in a community approach, you could learn from that, I'm sure too, so far.
Yeah, very interesting. But anyone else on that question? You know, is it important that young people have specific dreams, or is it important they have dreams?
I could chime in. I think it's important that young people have a vision and have plans. I think that we shouldn't put too much of an emphasis on having them pick out one specific field or occupation early in their lives. The research literature is pretty clear that we don't want youth to foreclose on options. And in addition, the selection of career options is very much influenced by gender-based and race and ethnic-based socialization. So we do want to have youth have a chance to kind of live in the world. But I think having I'd like to think about career planning as an ice cream cone, where you have a broader array of options at the top. It's kind of an interesting analogy here. And then, it gets more focused.
Yeah, very interesting. Yeah, Deirdre, please.
When I listen to the question, I think of the exam that when I was a postgraduate student, the exam question is, what is adolescence? And we had to write an essay on what is adolescence. And we view adolescence through so many different lenses. And so for me, I think the most important aspect around whether someone has a career idea is, are they curious? Does career curiosity exist in the mind of that young person? Because without that, if there is no curiosity, then actually there is an underlying issue around how the individual views themselves in the world of work. So I don't think we should get too hung up on the idea of everything has to be planned and it has to fall into a very perfect narrative. In many ways, people's careers are made up of multiple exposure and experiences to a world of work and of people. So I would go back to that career conversations, which Anthony and the team have produced, linked to career conversations. Is the curiosity there in terms of education, the world of work, and the individual's future? And I think that, as a career practitioner, gives us lots of insight to how ready that young person is to make some important decisions as they move through the education system.
Yeah, thank you. And Sarina, you've raised your hand too.
Yeah, I would echo what both David and Deirdre have had to say. I mean, for me, having a specific career goal is really almost a marker or a proxy to show that a young person has curiosity, as you say, Deirdre, has some hope. You don't set goals for yourself if you don't hope that you can achieve them, and has some engagement in the world of work and in career development. The specific goal to me likely will and likely should change over time. That's much less important. But I think the existence of some vision and some articulation of what that future might look like is a very good marker that career development is happening.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting point. We have Elena's asking, how can we convince governments to invest in career development when they're still struggling with getting learners to learn the fundamentals? I guess that's a common argument. I would almost turn this around. You know, how can we convince young people to study science if they have never met a scientist and don't know what scientists do? But I guess the question remains, you know, how can we make this more of a priority? Any insights on that?
I think there's a very quick response to Elena's, which is stats and stories, the two S's, because for governments, the evidence base is really, really important, and it usually does involve statistics which say what the return on investment will be, or that will actually measure the impact. But I think we also have to use the compelling stories, the success stories, and perhaps we don't always put those two together. And I think we've got to do more of that. And I think if we do that, we have a higher chance of success than just one or other.
Yeah, you know, Deirdre, actually, when we started with our work on this, it was actually surprising how weak the evidence base was. There's actually, you know, as Anthony and Catalina have shown, there's actually data out there that you can use, but actually very few people have actually tried to make this field of career guidance more of a science. We treat it still, you know, as a very kind of experiential kind of thing. And I do think this is certainly something where we should all do better to make sure that public policy does have a robust evidence base that looks into this. Good, and I'm afraid, you know, when the discussion gets really interesting is always when the time is running out, and I wanted to make sure that we have some time for Nick actually because he has such practical and powerful tools how career guidance can actually happen from the very earliest ages in education, because that's really one of the concerns that we have at the OECD, that career guidance often comes in, you know, when things become urgent, when students leave schools. Oh, well, where you want to go in your life? But we all know that the most important career decisions you do make in primary school. You know, that's when you decide whether you actually invest time and energy in learning, whether the subjects you put attention to, and I think that's the part I think Nick has some very interesting answers to. So Nick, screen is yours.
Thank you very much. Good, we're working now. Thank you for being so amazing sort of content. I mean, I'm glad it's recorded because I'm going to watch it 2 or 3 times. There's so much rich data, and it's great we've got 2 days to look into it in so much more detail. I'm just going to whiz through something that's happening in England. This was about 8 years ago. We had the challenge of trying to give all our young people the ability to interact with a range of people from different jobs, partly based on Anthony's research when he was with us in a groundbreaking study called Nothing in Common. So if you haven't seen that, I would recommend that. Looked at labour market data and young people and found that statistically there's nothing in common with what young people are aiming for and the labour market. And I know the OECD have done more work on that more recently with Dream Jobs. So we wanted to make it really easy for schools and volunteers to connect directly. We wanted to make it available to all schools, but focus for the ones who needed it most. And we've heard that a lot about the equality coming through. We were very tight on money, as so many people are. So we want to do it efficiently, effectively. and to reduce transaction costs. And we wanted a system where we could do specific campaigns, maybe based on geographical areas, economic sectors, gender diversity, school subjects. So we wanted a system that worked. So we did a great deal of consultation with the leaders of our education bodies, business leaders and government. And we came up with what is a very simple scheme. And what you see on the right is the example that New Zealand government have launched, which is basically connecting schools and volunteers on a sort of matchmaking website. We use very cutting edge technology to do that at scale. So it's a bit the same technology as used in online shopping. We harness the desire of people to want to be willing to volunteer, and we do either through their employer individually. And I'm glad to say we have quite a lot of volunteers from JP Morgan from all levels volunteering. And we wanted to keep the transaction costs really low, so it was available for free for employers and schools. The solution, you don't expect to see the sort of complexity on the right, but the complexity makes it very simple. Behind it, an awful lot of data flows, automated flows, reporting things and dynamic dashboards. But at the end of the day, this is a very simple way of getting people to talk to each other. Behind it is some bit of clever technology that helps us manage it. We've managed over 2 million interactions so far, 10,000 schools registered. I'm not going to read out all the sort of statistics. You can read them for yourself. But it's a technology, it's a combination of Salesforce and a very specific mapping technology in the UK that allows you to run it at scale, and also for us to see all sorts of different dashboards, some of which are available to employers, so we can tell employers what their staff are doing, where they're volunteering, the demographics of their own staff, and so on. Volunteers can choose from a range of things. Obviously, you've seen many of these in the work that Anthony is doing, looking around, from work experience, job shadowing, and then they can also talk about things that they're particularly interested in or have an experience of. The advantage of this is, volunteers are filling in their profile about themselves, and they can indicate the things that, they're interested in and matter to them. And they can put as much detail or as little detail in as possible. So the volunteers fill in their survey. And then it's to the schools. The schools are the customer, if you like, in the online shopping experience. So they go on and they search, as if you were searching to buy a new sofa. You'd search the sofas, decide what you want, and you press the I'm ordering one button. It's really as simple as that. They can search on a range of things, including around subject areas. And I particularly seen other comments about the importance of embedding in the curriculum. Ours is about trying to help kids see the relevance of what they're doing, which is so important. If children can't see the relevance of the subjects they're studying, how are they going to be motivated to do that? So schools can search this massive database. They can find people in their local area through the mapping, but also can do it virtually. I'll come on to that. And, our thing is to give them a range of people from every background, from every level of seniority, from apprentices to CEOs across every sector, sort of about every job title you can imagine. The schools go on and they can search this and find people. Here's an example from last week, and this is how a school's using it, particularly on the COVID stuff. And this is not really careers, you might say. This is about literacy, but to me, they're sort of all interlinked. This is about showing, those students coming back, they're struggling to get excited. Can they excite kids about the meaning of literacy? So that's, the school has gone in, it's got a specific need, it's mined this database of, in the UK, 67,000 volunteers. It's found people that are the right people for their students, and at the bottom, it sends them an invitation. Lots of materials we've developed over 8 years for schools and how to connect, just to make it really easy. I say at the heart of it's really simple, but there's lots of reflection, lots of guidance and so on in there. Just picking up briefly on Andreas's point, this is a graph I did for the World Economic Forum about 2 years ago when Andreas launched a report there, which looked at children's career aspirations and the jobs in the UK. So you won't be able to, you can't read the C1 to C25, you don't need to. It's the patterns you're looking at. The The C1s are the economic sectors in the UK. We classified 25 economic sectors. The light grey is where the jobs are predicted. The light orange is 7-year-olds, and the dark orange is 17-year-olds. And when you look at the patterns, you can look at C8, lots of jobs and no people. C6, lots of young people, no jobs. And we proved statistically there's nothing in common between the career aspirations of young people and the jobs. And someone was talking about the case for careers. To me, a lot of this is labour market shortages. Every country you speak to, they're struggling to find people. And the economic cost of not finding people or having highly educated people without any jobs is massive. And, if you compare that around the money that countries are spending on careers is a minute amount. And actually governments could save a huge amount of themselves of money with a little bit of investment in careers. The other report, if you've not seen, is The Future at 5, done by the OECD earlier this year, which again looks at the gender stereotype coming in early. Quote that Andreas uses a lot and I use a lot: you can't be what you can't see. That was an event we did, and the kids, nothing wrong with it. Want to be a taxi driver or a shopkeeper or a pizza maker. I'd love a pizza maker at the moment, but it's all about, broadening horizons, and it's about not getting children. I think, David, you made the thing, it's not closing down dreams, keeping dreams open, showing them what's possible, getting them excited about the importance of education and keeping that going for as long as possible when they go through this journey. The interactive means that actually now, kids can be connected with anyone, basically anywhere. That was an event Andreas and I did in Switzerland with people joining from all over the world. Suddenly this massive ability for schools maybe in rural areas where the limited number of local role models, suddenly connect in England to any role model in the UK and some cases internationally. And I think that's really powerful. So I think the interactual virtual could really open up opportunities for young people. I've probably talked enough, so I'm going to stop now.
Thanks, Anthony. And I've just have Asa Susain from Saudi Arabia saying, inspiring the future is an excellent platform. I've registered, was contacted by schools, I volunteered, and I've delivered career sessions. You can see actually you'll find people all over the world. And what I really like in this, it's not just, going the in-school experience, but it really opens school doors to expertise and experience from the world of work, from society. And you can see, I think, what impresses me is how much willingness there is actually in our communities to actually donate people's time to help young people, shape their future. So I think that's really interesting. Any comments our panel members have on this work and how we might take something like this forward? Hanka, how does it relate to your work?
Well, I mentioned the potential of digital solutions as really something that can be groundbreaking. So it's great to see it featured here, because really, the potential to reach out to role models or corporates in a very different location when you're maybe in a rural area, the only exposure you could have face-to-face would be your local shop, would be, the one factory that's out there. That's definitely the limiting kind of career orientation. And so I think, yeah, a lot of potential, and really great to see also the traction that you've had both on the school side as well as the employer side, because yeah, that can be really something, no limits.
And before we conclude our conference today, I wanted to ask you, Anthony, there are a number of participants here. You ask, how can countries get involved? Also including countries beyond the OECD membership. What are the opportunities? Some ask, why is our country not included in your data? That's probably just a matter of data availability, but sort of what are the opportunities for people actually to relate to your work? Could you just give us a few?
We're always on the lookout for great practice. And particularly now we have a very clear, I think, model of change, what we understand happens for young people when they go through their childhood and adolescence. And we can see the way that, particular activities, we've got great confidence now that they are, have a basis. But the problem with the longitudinal data is that we don't always know how they did it. We know that they did do it, they ticked the box, but we don't know the quality of the experience. We don't know how many times they did it sometimes. We don't know if it was involved, take example of practice interviews or resumes and CVs. We don't know if that was with people from the economic community or not. And so, we have I think, an increasingly scientific sort of model of change. But what we really want to do is to look for those great examples of practice, which really align with these empirical findings. And so after today, we'll be sending out a short evaluation where we're asking for a little bit of feedback, but it also gives people an opportunity to, share some of the experiences. And over the next few months, we'll follow up with people. Also, we have a free monthly newsletter where people can sign up for, and we can every month we send out an update about the work that we're doing. And that's a great opportunity, because we often ask the people in that little stakeholder group, to share some of the examples which we're looking for. And then we can go and investigate, and we can help share those, amplify them, to other countries. And I mean, our data is limited. For these longitudinal surveys, there's not many of them. We looked into every single one that we could find. And some of them are outside of the OECD, but we have got now a lot of data from many different countries and economic areas through PISA, and we can relate what we find in these data sets to those countries. Now, we don't always know for sure that local circumstances might mean that they play out in different ways. But I think now we have a set of questions which we would want to ask and think should be asked of education systems around the world. Because ultimately, we're looking at young people going through an education system where they're making, as you were saying, Andreas, important decisions from an early age about how much they value and prioritize different aspects of their education, with a view to having a sustained, a desirable adult life. And work, when it goes well, it's marvelous, but it also goes badly as well. And so we want to make sure that all young people going through those transitions are as best prepared as they possibly can. And we have been very grateful for people who have played into our thinking so far, and we continue to want to be open in that, and would welcome people to contact me and to help share their own experiences.
Thanks so much, and I want to thank you, Anthony, and Catalina for starting us off with a lot of evidence. I do believe that making this field of career guidance and not less of an art, but more of a science, with a stronger and more robust evidence base on what works, and also more peer learning across contexts and countries. Now, this is not something that we need to reinvent in every country, but there's a lot I think that we can learn from and with each other in this field. And I think your expertise, I think we had a fantastic panel here that showed us that this is a doable agenda. There are many things that are really, really hard in the field of education, but it seems here we have something that actually can be done, and that can be done well. And there are, countries and places that are clearly ahead in this. And I think there's a lot we can work on this. I want to also thank our participants here. And this is just the beginning. We will continue focusing on effective practice in the light of the findings here, and how guidance can best address the social inequalities that were also very present in our discussion here, how we can use guidance to enhance progression towards green jobs, future jobs, digitalization, and how we can best make use of online technologies in guidance. I mean, that question of scale and transferability will be with us. And I think, Hanka, you made that point, but I think it's, and we have seen a great example from Nick, how we can use digitalization to just bring the world to young people, and young people connected to the world. So we're going to continue tomorrow with the first of the papers from around the world, and I hope you'll be all joining us again. Thank you very much.